Hey guys, tonight we drift into ancient Egypt's darkest everyday habits they never teach in school. You step off a creaking little river boat into warm night air that smells like wet reeds, lamp smoke, fish, and a suspicious amount of human effort. The Nile slides past beside you like black silk under moonlight, calm and majestic, which is very generous of it considering how many people are depending on it not to ruin their week. Ahead, mud brick houses huddle together in the heat, dogs bark somewhere in the dark, and a donkey gives you the sort of offended noise that suggests you've already made a social mistake. It's beautiful, of course. It's also sticky, crowded, noisy, and just a little bit cursed. Ancient Egypt in school usually arrives gift-wrapped in gold masks, giant pyramids, and clean museum lighting. Real Egypt arrives with sweat in your eyebrows and the very real possibility that you probably won't survive this if you have even one modern standard left. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're down there, comment your location and your local time, because I love seeing where in the world you're listening from while we wander into history's stranger corners. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive first through sensation, not spectacle. That's the trick with the ancient world. It doesn't begin with monuments. It begins with what your body notices. The heat is the first thing to wrap itself around you. Even at dusk, the air still holds the day's warmth like a clay oven refusing to cool. Dust clings to your sandals. The mud underfoot is not exactly mud in the charming cottagecore sense. It is Nile silt, trampled by bare feet, livestock, carts, and all the things people would rather not discuss while eating. And that, already, is the first quiet lesson Egypt never gives you in school. Civilization looks grand from a distance, but up close it is mostly people trying to stay clean, fed, and not too annoyed. You walk through a settlement where nearly everything is made from mud brick, simple, practical, and not remotely eternal, which is why so much of ordinary Egyptian life vanished while tombs and temples hogged all the attention. The famous stone monuments survive because they were built for gods and kings. Everyone else lives in walls that crack, roofs that sag, and rooms that trap heat like they've taken it personally. Scholars still argue whether many of these houses felt socially cozy or physically claustrophobic, but as you squeeze past a narrow doorway while trying not to shoulder check a jar of grain, you begin leaning toward claustrophobic with personality. Inside one of these homes, the air is thicker. Smoke from cooking fires lingers where it pleases. A lamp burns animal fat or oil, and it gives off just enough light to show you that darkness in the ancient world is not romantic. It is full of corners. The family here is not poor by local standards, but comfortable still means sharing tight space with tools, baskets, sleeping mats, jars, and the constant low-level stress of keeping pests away from your food. There are no glowing refrigerators humming softly in the background. There is no sealed pantry. Everything that matters, bread, onions, beer, oil, linen, children, maybe a chicken with terrible timing, is just sort of around. And yes, beer. That is your first proper, everyday shock. Ancient Egyptians drink beer constantly, not because they are throwing one endless riverfront party, but because beer is often safer and more practical than plain water. This is one of those mainstream historical facts that sounds fun until you remember the hygiene standards involved. Egyptian beer is usually thick, cloudy, and closer to a grainy, fermented porridge than the icy clean pint your brain may be trying to imagine. You don't really sip it. You negotiate with it. Sometimes it nourishes you. Sometimes it insults your texture preferences. But it is a staple, and in a world where safe hydration matters, your dignity simply has to adapt. You move back outside, where evening life is still buzzing. Ancient Egyptian settlements are not silent places of solemn reverence. They are loud with work, gossip, and practical survival. Someone is pounding grain. Someone is hauling water. Someone is shouting at a goat with the emotional intensity of a family betrayal. Children dart between adults with the alarming speed and confidence of children in every century. Somewhere nearby, someone is preparing fish, and the smell arrives several seconds before your eyes do. This is not the Egypt of clean white textbook margins. This is the Egypt of body heat, shared space, and constant maintenance. And maintenance, honestly, is the secret engine of civilization. You are surrounded by systems designed to hold chaos at bay. Irrigation channels, food storage, weaving, brewing, washing, hauling, sweeping, patching, carrying, scraping, and beginning all over again tomorrow. The Nile makes life here possible, but it also demands obedience. Every year, its flooding deposits rich black silt that turns the surrounding land into one of the most productive agricultural zones in the ancient world. That fertility is why Egypt thrives for so long. But it also means everyday life is tied to mud, insects, wet labor, and a level of dependence on natural cycles that would make a modern calendar app cry. One odd little detail catches you early. So much of elite Egyptian beauty and cleanliness is, in practice, a war against smell. Not smell in the poetic sense. Actual smell. Heat plus bodies plus animals plus fish plus mud plus no deodorant equals an environment in which scent becomes social strategy. That's why oils, perfumed cones, incense, and fragrant unguents matter so much. They are not just luxury flair. They are a deeply understandable attempt to smell less like the apocalypse. You haven't even gotten into personal hygiene yet, and already you can feel where this story is going. As night deepens, the settlement changes character. The hard glare of the day softens. Voices lower. The horizon cools into indigo. The stars appear in absurd numbers, bright enough to make you momentarily forgive the insects. And there are insects. There are always insects. Tiny, persistent, winged reminders that ancient life is a direct assault on your sense of personal space. Flies have no respect for your journey. Mosquitoes see you as a fresh diplomatic opportunity. A scholar can write beautifully about the symbolic harmony of Nile civilization, but one mosquito in your ear at midnight has a way of reducing all historical grandeur to very immediate feelings. You start to notice something else too. Death is not far away here, even when life is bustling. Not in a dramatic horror movie way. More in the way it sits close to daily habit. Tombs are planned while people are still alive. Ancestors are remembered as part of household rhythm. Religion is not reserved for a once-a-week building visit. It is stitched into ordinary routine, into luck, health, birth, weather, work, and what happens after your final inconvenient breath. In Egypt, the sacred and the domestic keep bumping into each other in doorways. That closeness will matter more and more as you keep walking. For now, though, you just keep moving through the evening streets, letting your eyes adjust to this world as it actually is, not polished, not cinematic, not neatly separated into daily life and grand history. The same civilization that builds temples also gives people back pain, bug bites, dental misery, household stress, and deeply questionable remedies. That's what makes it interesting. And, frankly, that's what makes it human. Because once the gold fades and the hieroglyphs stop posing for the tourists, what you're left with is something much stranger and much more intimate. A society full of ordinary people doing perfectly normal things that, to you, feel just a little bit wrong. They wash in ways that don't feel clean. They eat things that slowly damage them. They beautify themselves with ingredients that flirt with danger. They sleep in heat, pray for health, fear illness, raise children, bury relatives, and get up tomorrow to do it all again. And that's where your night in Egypt really begins. Not at the pyramid, but at the threshold of an ordinary home, with dust on your feet, beer in a clay cup, smoke in the air, and the creeping realization that the ancient world is never truly dead. It just waits for you to notice the smell. By morning, Egypt smells like warm stone, river mud, stale smoke, and determination. You wake on a woven mat with a kind of full-body stiffness that makes you appreciate modern mattresses as one of humanity's top 5 achievements. Somewhere nearby, someone is already grinding grain with the rhythm of a person who has accepted that this is simply how mornings sound forever. A child is crying, a rooster is auditioning for a dramatic role, and the sun has not even fully climbed into the sky yet. Ancient Egypt does not do gentle starts. It does heat early, chores immediately, and personal hygiene in a way that is both surprisingly sophisticated and, somehow, still faintly alarming. Because if there is one thing the Egyptians care about deeply, almost obsessively, it is cleanliness. Or at least, what cleanliness means in a world without plumbing, hot showers, or your emotionally supportive bottle of body wash. You'd think the desert setting would make people dusty and resigned. In fact, the opposite happens. Egyptians are famously concerned with washing, grooming, oiling, scraping, shaving, and scenting themselves. To your modern brain, that sounds reassuring.
Good.
Lovely. Maybe this will be one of the less cursed parts of the journey. It is not. You begin with water, obviously, but not in the luxurious, steamy, shut the door and ignore your responsibilities sense. Washing in ancient Egypt is practical and often partial. People clean with basins, jars, and ladles, using water brought in by hand or stored carefully. There is no magical tap waiting to solve your morning. Water is labor. Every splash has a backstory. So instead of long baths, daily cleanliness often involves wiping down, rinsing strategically, and using oils to finish the job. You pour water over your hands, face, arms, feet. The zone civilization has mutually agreed matter first, and then someone hands you a cloth, and what is essentially a cosmetic chemistry set built by optimism. This is where the Egyptians become unexpectedly modern and deeply strange at the same time. They use oils constantly. Scented oils, skin oils, hair oils, ritual oils, fancy oils if you're rich, more suspicious oils if you're not. Oil softens the skin, helps trap moisture in the desert climate, and, crucially, makes you smell less like a sweating mammal under the North African sun. And honestly, fair enough. In a place where the heat can turn everyone into a walking onion by midday, fragrance is not vanity. It is diplomacy. But then comes the part that makes you instinctively lean away, cleansing pastes and mineral salts. Egyptians use natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture, for all kinds of things, including cleaning. It is genuinely important in Egyptian life. Mainstream historical fact: natron was widely used in ancient Egypt for cleansing, preservation, and ritual purification, not just in mummification but in ordinary practical life too. It helps with washing clothes, treating surfaces, and giving people that fresh, crisp, "I have briefly conquered bacteria" feeling, which is great in theory. In practice, your skin now feels like it has been politely exfoliated by a desert spirit. And then there's the shaving. Egyptian grooming culture has a very strong opinion about body hair, and that opinion is absolutely not. Men shave. Women often remove body hair too. Heads are shaved. Faces are shaved. Armpits are handled with the seriousness of a sacred duty. In elite circles especially, body hair is often associated with dirt, disorder, and not having your life together. If you are trying to look polished, respectable, and not vaguely barbaric, smooth skin is the move. So there you are, standing in the courtyard while someone demonstrates a copper razor with the confidence of a person who has never had to explain a shaving accident to urgent care. This is one of those moments where history feels a little too close to home. You are in one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, and somehow the vibe is still pain in the name of presentation. Scholars still argue whether some grooming ideals were driven more by practical hygiene, aesthetic preference, or religious concepts of purity, but in daily life the result is the same. A lot of people in Egypt are spending a surprising amount of time trying to become sleek, fragrant, and socially acceptable before breakfast. And if they don't shave cleanly enough, well, that's where wigs come in. Now wigs, in the Egyptian imagination of pop culture, usually look glamorous, glossy black, neat braids, elegant beads, very museum gift shop. But the practical reason wigs matter is less glamorous and much more sweaty. If you shave your head to stay cool and reduce lice, you can then wear a wig when you want to look nice, official, seductive, or simply less like you've given up. It's the ancient version of saying, "No, this is not my exhausted real form. Please enjoy my public edition." And honestly, it's genius. Also faintly horrifying, because wigs require maintenance. They collect dust. They hold scent. They can harbor exactly the sort of tiny life forms you are hoping to escape by shaving in the first place. One odd little detail from Egyptian daily life is that some wigs were perfumed and styled with fats or waxes to hold their shape, meaning your elegant social presentation could, under enough heat, begin to soften in ways no one involved was emotionally prepared for. By now you are beginning to understand the real logic of Egyptian cleanliness. It is not about feeling fresh in the modern spa sense. It is about managing the body, cooling it, scenting it, smoothing it, controlling its leaks, smells, and visible chaos. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the face. The eyes, especially, are treated almost like a sacred project. Egyptians famously wear heavy eye makeup, black kohl, green malachite pigments, elegant lines extending at the corners. In textbook images, it looks regal and dramatic. In real life, it is also practical. Eye cosmetics may help reduce glare, repel insects a bit, and possibly even lower the risk of certain eye infections, though not in the miracle skincare way a modern beauty ad would promise. Scholars still argue whether the medicinal benefits were consistently intentional or partly a useful side effect of cultural beauty practices. Either way, your face routine has become surprisingly intense for a civilization you originally associated mostly with giant triangles. And then there's the teeth. Ah, yes, the smile situation. This is where Egypt's commitment to cleanliness runs straight into the brick wall of material reality. People do clean their mouths. Chew sticks, powders, rinses, all of that exists in some form. But the daily diet, especially bread made from stone-ground flour, often contains tiny particles of grit. Over time, this absolutely demolishes teeth. You haven't even reached lunch, and already the entire civilization is quietly grinding its molars into archaeology. So even if someone looks elegant, shaved, perfumed, lined eyes, spotless linen, there is a decent chance their mouth hurts. This is the strange, slightly heartbreaking truth of the ancient world. So many things are maintained beautifully on the surface because the body itself is so vulnerable underneath. You see it everywhere now. In the linen garments washed and reworn under the sun. In the little jars of unguent lined up like hopeful chemistry. In the care people take with their appearance before stepping into public life. Cleanliness here is not a luxury side quest. It is armor. Social armor, physical armor, spiritual armor. Because in Egypt, being clean doesn't just mean not dirty. It can also mean being orderly, proper, balanced, and in harmony with what the world expects of you. And the world expects a lot. By late morning, the heat is already gathering again. Sweat returns despite everyone's best efforts. Dust reclaims your ankles. A fly lands on your shoulder with the confidence of inherited property. The oils begin to warm on skin. Linen clings just enough to become irritating. And suddenly the whole grooming ritual makes sense in a way that no museum display case ever could. It's not about perfection. It's about fighting entropy before noon. And as you stand there under the bright Egyptian sun, faintly salty, heavily moisturized, and trying not to think too hard about communal grooming tools, you realize something almost comforting. Every civilization, no matter how grand, spends a ridiculous amount of time trying to stop human beings from being aggressively human. Egypt just does it with more eyeliner. By the time food arrives, you are hungry enough to become emotionally attached to a loaf of bread, which is fortunate because in ancient Egypt, bread is not just food. It is the food. Bread is breakfast, labor fuel, household stability, salary, status marker, mild disappointment, and over enough years, a slow-moving dental revenge plot. You begin the morning with what looks, from a distance, comforting enough. Flat loaves, coarse cakes, maybe some onions, perhaps dates or figs if the household is doing reasonably well, and a clay cup of beer thick enough to qualify as an opinion. There is no glittering breakfast spread here. No cinematic fruit arrangement. Just the practical architecture of survival laid out in edible form. And honestly, at first it works. The bread is hearty, dense, nutty, a little smoky from the oven. You tear into it with the kind of gratitude that makes you briefly believe ancient life might not be so bad after all. You take another bite. And then another. And then, almost imperceptibly, you feel it, a tiny, faint crunch that is not supposed to be there. That, unfortunately, is the sound of history entering your molars. One of the least glamorous but most fascinating truths about ancient Egyptian daily life is that their bread often contains traces of grit, tiny particles of sand or stone from the grinding process. Mainstream historical fact: Egyptian grain was frequently milled with stone querns, and archaeological studies show that this contributed heavily to severe tooth wear across the population. Which means the civilization that gives the world some of its most elegant art also quietly gives itself the bite pattern of exhausted masonry workers. And now you can't unfeel it. Every chew comes with a whisper of abrasion. Every meal is a long-term negotiation with your enamel. It's not that the bread is bad. It's that the whole system of producing it is beautifully efficient and mildly ruinous. Grain is ground on stone, flour picks up grit, bread gets baked, and over decades your teeth wear down like chalk left in the rain. This is one of those dark, everyday habits that no school textbook really lingers on, probably because civilization built on annual floods and molar erosion doesn't fit neatly under a cheerful classroom poster. You sit near a grinding station to watch how the magic happens, and the answer is, with effort, repetition, and lower back pain. Women, servants, laborers, depending on the household, kneel or bend over grinding stones, crushing grain into usable flour through sheer persistence. It is rhythmic, dusty work, and not remotely romantic once you notice how long it takes. A basket of grain beside them, a stone slab in front, fine powder collecting slowly, shoulders tightening, hands repeating the same motion until the body stops asking why. Scholars still argue whether bread production in ordinary households was more communal and flexible than we assume, or whether it was often as relentlessly labor-intensive as the archaeological evidence suggests. Either way, one thing is obvious. Breakfast begins long before breakfast. And then there's the beer. You have already met Egyptian beer in passing, but now you get to know it properly, which is rather like being introduced to a neighbor who seems nice until you realize he keeps chickens in his hallway. Egyptian beer is made from grain, often from partially baked loaves or mash, and the result is less sparkling refreshment and more cloudy nutritional slurry. It can be sour, thick, yeasty, and surprisingly filling, not because the Egyptians have terrible taste, but because beer here is doing several jobs at once. It hydrates. It nourishes. It stores calories. It travels better than your optimism. You lift the cup and take a careful swallow. It's warmish, grainy, slightly fermented in a way that says, I am alive, and I resent your judgment. You try not to react. A child nearby drinks from a smaller cup with the casual ease of someone who has never known iced water and therefore remains blissfully unspoiled. And that's the thing. Food in Egypt is not built around culinary novelty. It is built around reliability. Grain keeps people alive. Beer keeps people going. Onions and garlic add flavor, yes, but also punch through monotony with the agricultural confidence of vegetables that know they've earned their place. Fish from the Nile shows up often enough, especially closer to the river, and legumes like lentils or beans help fill the spaces bread alone can't reach. But your body notices what your imagination usually doesn't. This is a cuisine of repetition. A lot of the same textures, a lot of the same ingredients. A lot of chewing, swallowing, storing energy, and moving on, which means little pleasures matter more. A handful of dates feels luxurious. Honey feels almost indecently generous. Fresh figs, still soft from the sun, can transform an otherwise dusty morning into something briefly poetic. You begin to understand why sweetness has power in the ancient world. Not because people are quaint and simple, but because daily life is physically demanding enough that small comforts hit like divine intervention. And still, the darker side keeps creeping in. Because once you start paying attention to food, you also start noticing storage. And storage in a hot climate is where your appetite begins to develop trust issues. Grain is stored in jars or bins. Bread goes stale fast. Fish can spoil with unnerving speed. Flies consider themselves active stakeholders in every meal. Cats may help with pests, and yes, they absolutely deserve some PR credit here, but they are not miracle workers. Rats, insects, mold, and contamination are part of the ordinary food ecosystem in ways your modern kitchen standards would simply classify as absolutely not. One odd detail that somehow makes this both worse and more charming. Egyptian households often use baskets, linen covers, and clever storage jars to protect food as best they can, which means an enormous amount of domestic intelligence is constantly being deployed just to stop lunch from becoming a public health event. Civilization, once again, is mostly people trying to keep things from rotting. You watch bread being baked in a clay oven, and for a moment, it is genuinely beautiful.
Hand-shaped dough.
Ash glows red beneath the heat. Loaves puff and darken. The smell is rich and almost comforting enough to erase your recent relationship trauma with grit. This is where the ancient world can be very persuasive. It knows how to seduce you with labor made visible. Fire, flour, hands, heat, all of it simple, all of it timeless. Then someone cracks a tooth on a grain fragment and the spell breaks a little. That injury may not be dramatic in the moment, but multiply tiny daily abrasions across years, and the consequences become grim. Egyptian skeletal remains often show severe tooth wear, abscesses, infections, and jaw issues. There are people around you right now, clean linen, lined eyes, perfectly ordinary morning, who are quietly living with chronic dental pain while still expected to work, socialize, marry, parent, worship, and act normal. Which is, when you think about it, one of the most human things imaginable, because ancient suffering is rarely theatrical. It is repetitive, manageable until it isn't, hidden inside routines, folded into habits, so ordinary no one writes them down dramatically enough for your school textbook to notice. By midday, food and labor are already inseparable. Workers in the fields carry simple meals. Children nibble bread between chores. Someone tears onions with rough fingers and passes them around without ceremony. Eating is not a sacred pause from life. It is woven through life, grabbed where possible, shared when practical, and judged mostly by one question. Will this get us through the heat? The answer usually is yes. Not elegantly, not painlessly, but yes. And that may be the most revealing thing about Egyptian food. It is not built to impress the future. It is built to survive the present. As you finish your meal, brushing away crumbs and trying not to think too hard about your teeth, you glance at the people around you and realize how invisible all this would be if you only looked at statues. Stone faces never show jaw pain. Painted tomb scenes never include someone discreetly regretting breakfast. But the real Egypt, the one under the polish, is full of tiny daily compromises between nourishment and damage, comfort and wear, beauty and bodily cost. You take one last sip of beer. It is still thick, still warm, still somehow both helpful and mildly accusatory. And with bread grit still ghosting between your teeth, you move on through the day, beginning to understand that in Egypt, even the most ordinary bite comes with consequences.